the little corner of the internet where books are taken very seriously. Writers are mildly over-caffeinated and literature is always allowed to be a little messy, a little honest, and a lot human. I'm Ruchi Acharya, your host and the founder and editor-in-chief of Wingless Publishers, a creative community built for readers, writers, and those curious souls who believe words can turn even the most personal stories into something universal. Today's conversation is about a fascinating question. How does an essay take one person's experience and make it feel like it belongs to all of us? To explore this, we are joined by the brilliant Gabrielle Nigmond, a creative writing MFA student specializing in memoir essays. Gabrielle's work dives into the emotional complexity of life with a sharp eye and a touch of dark humor, often exploring themes like grief and yes, even botox. Her writing has appeared in literary journals such as The Smart Set and As You Were. Her current thesis examines the intersection of essay, form, and grief, asking an intriguing craft question. When loss is made of countless overwhelming moments, how does a writer decide which one becomes the structural backbone of the story? So today, we will be talking about memoir, grief, humor, structure, and the delicate art of turning the personal into the universal. Dreamers, grab your tea, coffee, or existential notebook because this is going to be a thoughtful and slightly mysterious literary conversation. Gabrielle, welcome to the Business Dreamer podcast. How are you feeling?
Great. Thank you very much for having me.
Before we jump into intensive discussion of today's topic, would you like to tell us something about yourself, to our dear listeners?
Sure. I'm a non-traditional student. I didn't get a bachelor's until I was almost in my 30s at the University of Virginia. And then I had some really great mentors there who encouraged me to apply for my MFA. I'm an MFA student in thesis at Virginia Commonwealth University, and I have 2 children that I'm also parenting at the same time as I'm writing, and they give me a lot of inspiration and encourage me to write at very odd times.
Well, that's such a beautiful life, and really like us to know their names.
They have very interesting names. My eldest son is Valentino, and my youngest son is Magnus. It's very interesting, actually. I didn't choose either of those names, but I love them. I would have gone with something probably literary, but I love their names. They fit both of their personalities.
You often work with personal material. So may I ask, at what point does a personal story begin to transform into something universal for readers?
That's a great question. I would say if you've become neurotic about it, or essentially if it's waking you up at night, or if you find your mind wandering to it, it's a story. That's at least how it works for me. My brain will tell me, pay attention, pay attention. If a story is starting to take place in my head, I will get out of the shower dripping wet and go write it down. I have so many voice notes on my phone. So your mind will know when it's a story. It will tell you, and you just have to be willing to pay attention to it.
The fact that, yes, we writers are hysterical in the sense like whenever the story is there, we're gonna write it down on tissue paper while we're sitting at the cafe. For me, it happens, I think, in poetry a lot. Like when I come across a beautiful poetic words, like will be some new metaphors that I discovered, being a writer and to make your work universal because world is changing rapidly. And once again, you want your story to be delivered to different people from across the globe who hold different perspectives or their own very views to see the world in influential manners. It's so radical with the world changing so rapidly to make a real material into something universal.
It is difficult to universalize something. And that's really the trick of writing. And that's why writers gather tools. And that's essentially what getting an MFA is really studying the craft tools that we utilize to make sure that we have a shared humanity that can be experienced through our writing. And it's hard to do. And I used to think that you just sat down and you just would write and put everything out there. But it turns out that you actually need structure to your writing. There's so much sensory input involved with any kind of, trauma or even joy. And being able to sort of swim through those emotions and guide it to be something that we can share and have somebody read it and say, I absolutely know what you're feeling right now, or I feel that too. That's, for me, the goal of my writing, is to be able to share my humanity with someone else and to answer big questions in my life.
Grief often reveals, a habit, that suddenly has nowhere to go. It just stays in your heart. So these kind of details make loss tangible. And help one recognize their own experiences within the story. Because when we are writing or crafting an essay or writing a short story about it, perhaps, I guess we want it to be raw, like full of raw emotions. We don't want to sugarcoat it. We don't want to make it sound cliche just for the sake of getting published or yada yada. We want it to be something pure, the most authentic we can ever be. It doesn't matter how it comes out to be. It may sound roughly, or it may rupture or feel through your heart or rupture your soul. Let it be, because I guess that's where you become a memoir essayist. That's how we differ from other essays in the poetry. So it is indeed important.
I like what you said about letting it be, because I think this is for grief, but also for other emotions. Sometimes grief becomes metaphorical in our life. For example, like I wrote an object essay about a box, and the box simply holds my brother's like some of his mail that we took from his house, his service record from being in the military, but this box symbolized grief. And so talking about its contents and the things inside of it then created its own essay. And so that became an object essay. An object essay as a structure is a really good structure to start with, because typically when somebody passes away or when you fall in love or whatever, there's some kind of object that sort of symbolizes that. And that's, to me, a very good place for writers to start.
Always a question that how do you decide which moment becomes the central pillar of an essay?
So deciding on moments are definitely hard, but the human mind actually does this amazing thing where once you get some distance from this incredible emotion that you've experienced, your brain does something called, I think in psychology, it's called a flashbulb memory, meaning you remember a snippet here, a snippet there. And so I think if you sit with yourself, you will, and let your brain do the work, you'll know which moments. There's several websites as well for writers where you can just look up craft essays. And I think by reading other authors and seeing how they formulate their feelings on certain things is also really helpful. So just reading and sitting with yourself and letting your brain sort of show you, okay, this is the moment that matters. Like for me, I wrote an ekphrasis essay, and that was an essay that uses a piece of artwork to then inspire an essay or a story. My brother was a bodybuilder, and I saw the Atlas Farnese, it's a very muscular sculpture in Italy, and it reminded me of my brother. And I used that as a segue to talk about how my brother had become paralyzed. And it was one specific moment, and it was the moment of him saying goodbye to me. And I used that format to do it. You don't get the whole picture of my grief in that essay, but you do get the overarching feeling of loss and of grief in that particular essay.
It's such a sensitive subject matter, and there is a very thin line, between what you really want to share to the world and what not to. Because there are few moments that you would like to keep it to yourself. For example, I do write poems, but sometimes when I'm writing a poem for my friends or my family members or my partner, I like to keep it like personal, one-on-one, or like it's between us. It's for you. I know it's one of my best poems. I really want to get it published out there, but no, some things are like meant to feel the feels felt by the heart. Yes, indeed. Again, a structure in personal essays. Trying to find out where that thin line was being drawn. That brings me to the next question. Your book explored unexpected like grief and botox together. So what draws you to this unusual pairing, and how do they help reframe emotional experience?
I know that that's a really weird pairing. So this is another type of essay. So that we're talking now about science writing and science narrative. I wanted to talk about why women use Botox or alter their face. I wanted to talk about why I was personally using Botox. And so I needed to find a way to write about it. But I just had no idea. So I decided that I was going to do a funny science narrative. And you can actually read this particular essay. It's published online. The literary magazine is called The Smart Set. I think I needed to talk about this obsession that we start getting into as women, the grief of our bodies changing, and why I'm interpreting that as grief instead of joy or happiness. And I just wanted it to be kind of funny. So I often read for voice when I'm going to write something. So if I want something to be funny or dark humor, of course, I read David Sedaris. And believe it or not, Colin Jost, he wrote a hilarious book called A Very Punchable Face. And so I just started sitting down, but then I also had to do the science research part of it, because it was the idea of warning women about the possible detrimental effects, but also owning the feeling of wanting to inject your face all the time. So it's a different kind of grief, but still a type of grief.
I guess instead of being judgmental or being prejudicial about it, I guess we should support whoever wants to bear the pain or tackle the grief in their own way. Give them space until they are ready to let it go. Why not? Why not?
Yeah, I mean, any emotion for me, especially grief, I just wonder, where does grief go? And how do we experience it daily? How does it change our lives? And that's why I say really follow your neuroses. What are you doing differently when you've experienced grief? And I'm why am I thinking about this? So I would sit down and I would write about it, or I'd have a question about something. So I think giving yourself over to that process and just noticing is a great way to find the structure of how you need to write. I just would encourage writers to not think that you have to start at the beginning and then end at the end. Sometimes there's just a really good nugget in the middle, and to explore that and to allow time to slow down and to allow your audience to linger with you in those small moments of grief where it's really dynamic on the page, and being able to recognize where it is.
As you said, tiny moments are so important, and to slow down the process, noticing someone on the chair, or just feeling the room, or reaching for your phone to text them, make grief real and visible. Grief is not only felt during funerals or anniversaries. It appears in mundane details. A song familiar smell, or a habit that suddenly has nowhere to go. Maybe you're sitting at the park and you're watching, a kid playing on the ground, and it just takes you back, during your childhood to show their grief rather than explain it to somebody. And they say the small moments are powerful because they show rather than explain grief.
Right.
Yeah, like a single image, for example, a half-drunk cup of tea, an unborn cold. It can communicate more than a long explanation of sadness.
I think it's really important when you're writing memoir, essay, or any kind of essay to really be in scene. I think so often especially when we're experiencing grief or big emotions, it's like, I want to tell you why losing my brother was terrible, and I want to tell you every single detail. And that's what we do in conversation. Like when we're in counseling or talking to a friend about what we're experiencing. But really the trick in the writing is to use your words to create a moving picture of what grief looks like. Because when we do that, when we give those details, even though they're so specific to us, it makes them more real to your reader and more accessible to them, because then they can imagine it in their heads instead of just listening to you tell how sad you are.
It's huge, writing it down, writing all about those tiny, small movements, healing also happens quietly. I guess there's also, readers, they also do recognize these small experiences in their own lives. Okay, well, that brings me to another question. As an MFA student focusing on memoir essays, how has your academic training influence the way you approach structure, voice, and experimentation? I have to answer.
Oh my gosh, it's completely changed. When I say I was a non-traditional student, I also will say that I have dyslexia, and I was probably the least well-read candidate of my cohorts. Even though I have a lot of books behind me, I didn't read as a child. It was my older sister that figured out I wasn't reading or writing well, and she would come home from college and tutor me. So I'm really grateful to her. She changed my life. But so when I first came to the program, I just thought we sat down and trauma dumped. I was like, because everybody has a story in the MFA program. We're all here to work through our emotions. But I know that's not how I approach it now. Once I realize that I've been thinking about something for a while, I will just sit down and write about it. And then I'll come back to it and come back to it. So that emotion or that essay becomes a friend that I visit. And sometimes I need to walk away from that friend for a little while and then come back. So my approach is now is assessing the writing after giving it time, after coming back to it several times, and then picking out what in that initial writing is good. And that was a great suggestion to me by one of my cohorts. He starts every writing session by lighting a candle and reading for 10 minutes. And so once you start reading essays, you sort of get to know who has a similar writing style to you or similar voice. Or sometimes if you're reading a book and you're like, wow, I really connect to this book, and you figure out it's probably because that voice works for you, you write it down.
It's a very cozy, comforting feeling to take out loud and to discuss on such a sensitive topic, because many people are often afraid, to talk about grief in general. If someone is going through something, they prefer, because they don't want to mess anything up, let them be. Maintain a one-hand distance. Maybe we'll come back after a couple of months or so. So, yeah, it's indeed important to understand it's just an emotion. It's of course, it gravitates your soul way too much. All right. Moving on to the next question. For emerging writers into artists, what is the biggest mistake they make when trying to universalize their story?
They tell and don't show. They're not adept at understanding that there's a writing process, meaning there are very few writers I know that can sit down and write something and then they're like, this is great. I would love to be that kind of writer, but I'm just not. And most people are not that way. So the biggest mistake is they tell us how they feel instead of show us how they feel. And by choosing like a small, tiny sliver of the moment that they experience to represent the bigger feeling.
And in order to have the quality in the first place, I think you need to give time. You have to slow down. And in general, it's good to slow down, in all honesty, like whatever job you are in or whatever lifestyle you are maintaining, please do take out time to just slow down. Just walk slowly. Just have your morning coffee or tea, sip it slowly instead of just rushing it and gulping it and you're not being even able to enjoy it. Still have rapid fire round. Okay, if you were suddenly crowned the poet laureate of the universe, what would be the first completely unnecessary rule you would make for all writers?
An unnecessary rule for all writers: you can't use AI.
Which classic author would absolutely roast your writing habits if they watch you work for a day? A. Virginia Woolf. B. Oscar Wilde. C. Ernest Hemingway.
I don't know. I feel like everybody's writing process is different. And if you're a writer, you just accept whatever. I mean, I look at Stephen King, who says that he can't even remember writing because, he was like heavily on drugs initially and wrote in a closet somewhere. I don't know how to answer that, I guess.
If your life right now had to be the title of a book, what would it be?
Oh, gosh, that's a great question. I don't know. Oh my gosh, I can't answer that. I mean, you know what it is? I'm in such a good place right now. I'm super happy. I have a wonderful husband. My kids are doing well, which is completely opposite to how my life used to be. That it's almost sometimes harder for me to write or be creative when I'm like in such a great space.
Okay. But any book that you feel personally related to or it resonates with you?
That would be also, do writers really answer these questions? This is hilarious. I don't have any particular author that I identify with. I love David Sedaris. He's hysterical. I also love, I don't want to sound pretentious, but I love William Shakespeare. I also took a class on John Milton and ended up really thinking he was like brilliant. And I love them all for different reasons. I will say that the authors that I most identify with are the ones that are willing to be self-deprecating. So like in modern literature, that they're a little bit grittier, and willing to like throw yourself on the line if you need to. But yeah, I love the classics. I'm still getting used to modern lit, but I don't think I have one author that I would like identify with.
Okay, if you have to pick any personality in the form of the punctuation mark, which one are you most like? A, the dramatic exclamation mark. B, the mysterious ellipsis. Or C, the sophisticated semicolon.
Gosh, can I be an N dash?
Oh, I love that. Okay, what's the most ridiculous thing you have done to avoid writing when you had a deadline?
There are a lot of things that I'll do. I would say empty some sort of closet in my house and reorganize it.
Okay, last question but not the least. If you could steal one line from any famous writer and pretend you wrote it, which author it would be? A, Emily Dickinson. B, Sylvia Plath. Or C, William Shakespeare.
Man, who wouldn't want to steal a line from Shakespeare and be like, oh, I wrote that?
All right. So on that note, Gabrielle, your rapid fire round is over. Beat the drum, it's late.
Woohoo! Well, thank you very much for having me, and it was a pleasure talking to you, and it was a pleasure meeting you.
Gabrielle, and that brings us to the end of today's episode of the Wingless podcast. A heartfelt thank you once again to Gabrielle Nigmond for joining us and sharing such thoughtful insights on how deeply personal experiences can transform into essays that resonate with readers everywhere. Conversations like this remind us that writing is not just about telling a story, it's about discovering the moments that quietly connect the soul. To our listeners, thank you for spending this time with us. If today's discussion inspired you to reflect, write, or simply look at your own story a little differently, then we have done a good job. Until next time, keep reading, keep writing, and stay tuned. Thank you.